Welcome, and let me start by thanking our co-chair representatives, our distinguished speakers, our panelists and participants for joining us today for this important conversation. Just a little housekeeping. We have interpretation, English, Spanish, so if you need, please reach out to the team and you can get a headset. This is the Finance COP, and today is Finance Day. It's the craziest and most hectic day of the COP, at least over the last 3 or 4 COPs. So we appreciate you coming and joining us and being here today for this event. In Baku, the new collective quantified goal, or NCQG, will be established. And other key deliberations on loss and damage, carbon markets, and adaptation finance are taking place as we speak. It is also the last COP before the submission of the next round of NDCs, what we're now calling the NDCs 3.0. The first Global Stocktake highlighted the current implementation and ambition gap. Around $2.4 trillion in investments per year are needed by 2030 in emerging markets and developing countries outside of China for a just energy transition, adaptation and resilience, loss and damage, and nature conservation and restoration. This is a 4-fold increase from current levels. Not all investment needs are additional to existing development needs. And there are strong co-benefits in climate alignment, energy systems, infrastructure expansions, rural development, water access and security, amongst other areas. There's a clear connection between strong climate action and development, especially for our developing countries. Yet, available capital is limited, inadequate, and not following where the most needs are. Countries face complex and onerous requirements to access climate finance, including stringent procedures for project development and evaluation, and long decision-making times and deployment timeframes. Private finance is not flowing at the speed and scale needed, given the most climate investments do not meet the investment risk-return requirements. And while the use of blended finance shows promise, the availability and efficiency of concessional capital to mobilize private investments has been extremely limited. Mobilizing finance at the speed and scale needed requires a concerted and coordinated effort across multiple stakeholders and an integrated approach that boosts all sources of finance. The NDC Partnership is uniquely positioned to support developing countries in navigating the complex climate finance landscape and optimizing the use of different sources of finance to unlock ambitious climate development action. We bring together countries, institutions, and private sector actors with a deep understanding of country contexts, sophisticated technical expertise in climate and finance, and proven solutions to accelerate access to and deployment of finance. The partnership is supporting almost 100 member countries in a wide range of areas, including development investment plans and finance strategies, strengthening enabling environments, integrating NDCs into economic and fiscal policies and financial regulations, strengthening coordination capacities, and development of projects and financial instruments to accelerate climate and development. The partnership also hosts the Center for Access to Climate Finance to collect and share lessons learned, best practices, and innovative approaches that can inform country and system-level reforms to increase the availability, speed, and quality of climate finance deployment. The event today will explore the transformational impact of deep collaboration across public and private sectors to finance the implementation of NDCs, enabling the needed ambition to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. We will look to highlight successful experiences and pathways to drive the mobilization of finance at scale. We will hear a keynote from IFAD's president and transformative approaches that IFAD is spearheading in the realm of using public investment to mobilize private finance at scale. We will then move to a panel discussion with leaders and experts representing public and private organizations working in the climate finance space. But to open this event and welcome you all, I will start by introducing our steering committee co-chairs, Rwanda and Denmark, both with strong leadership on climate and inspiring practices on how to create meaningful collaboration between the public and the private sector. My name is Pablo Vieira. I am the Global Director of the NDC Partnership, and it's a pleasure to me to invite Teddy Mugombo, CEO of the Rwanda Green Fund, or FONERWA, to the podium to deliver opening remarks.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here today representing our Minister of Environment. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us, but really pleased and thank you to the NDC Partnership for organizing such an important event on Climate Finance Day. So my name is Teddy Mugabo, and I'm the CEO of the Rwanda Green Fund, and we are happy to be a co-chair for the NDC Partnership. Just to share a little bit about what we're doing in Rwanda. The government of Rwanda has set very ambitious goals in, we want to develop in a climate-compatible way. We believe that we don't have to choose between one or the other, between development or climate. So therefore, we've set very ambitious strategies and policies to guide this process. Furthermore, we also realize that, it's one thing to have policies and strategies, and another to actually access the financing to be able to do it. And so that's why that's the reason behind establishing a national fund for environment and climate change, which is the institution that I head. So the Rwanda Green Fund is a financing vehicle which plays the role of, working with bilateral partners as well as multilateral partners, but really ensuring that we're getting financing and channeling it and making sure that it also goes where it needs to go. So we're able to deploy grant financing to public sector institutions, but we've also been able to work with our partners to catalyze, to play a catalytic role, especially when it comes to the private sector. So we are doing a de-risking job. Now, just to give a bit of, why we're now talking about the programmatic approach. So over the last decade, we've been doing the approach of resource mobilization has been very much focused on project-based. And what we've seen is that oftentimes it's fragmented and also, not really easy to see impact on the ground. And that is why we started thinking on, how do we ensure that we are actually implementing long-term, but also, seeing the impact. So that's the reason behind the programmatic approach. So very quickly, the programmatic approach to climate action centers on integrating climate goals with national development, aligning ambitious targets with sector-specific strategies, such as agriculture, transport, energy. So we also don't believe that we need to come and climate-proof existing plans, but rather, how do we work with the ministries of agriculture from the get-go, ensuring that they develop a sustainable or resilient food system? How do we work with the Ministry of Infrastructure to ensure that as they're developing the infrastructure systems, that those systems are actually climate-proofed? We're also doing this, so once we have the programs developed, we then need to figure out, what areas need to be financed through a public investment and what areas, how do we also leverage the private sector on board? Just really this is a process we're starting, and we've already identified 3 sector priorities, which is agriculture, sustainable landscapes, as well as sustainable cities. So on the international front, Rwanda actively engages with global climate funds and institutions such as the Green Climate Fund and IMF. And just so you know, Rwanda was one of the first countries to access the RST, the Resilient Sustainability Trust. And this has also come with reforms and also really bringing on the Ministry of Finance on board. And actually today, after this session, if you have time, we're going to be showcasing the recently Climate and Nature Finance Strategy, which has just been launched by the Ministry of Finance. I think this is also something that is really critical. If we want to see, climate action on the ground, and we're talking about finance, I think it's time that we bring the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Finance together. And so this has also been a great achievement. So let me wrap up there. Again, I look forward to very fruitful discussions. And thank you very much, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Teddy, for your remarks. And Rwanda is a very clear example countries going in the right direction to effectively mobilize finance from the public and private sectors. And I want to reiterate your invitation to your event later today because it's very important. I would like now to introduce Ole Tonke, Undersecretary for Development Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, to provide his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Pablo, and thank you so much for inviting us to this event. And it's, I mean, Denmark, we've been a member of NDC Partnership since its foundation many years ago, it seems already now. I think we've seen it grown to a powerful collective, really driving action forward on the ground. And I mean, for me, what is really key is that this partnership is more relevant than ever. I mean, and this is, now it is crunch time. We are now moving into the NDC 3.0 that needs to be developed and delivered already, I think, by March next year. And probably a lot of them will be late and will not be there and ready before we go to Belém, all of us next year. But that's going to be a key moment in our drive towards fighting climate change. And as also we've heard from my Rwandan colleague and what Pablo alluded to around how do we actually think about the private sector and how do we involve them as such. I wanted to reflect a little bit on how we try to do it in Denmark, because back in, I believe, 2019, when the at that time new government came into place, it was actually on a very strong vote from the Danish people that they needed to do something seriously about climate change. So they wrote into the government agenda and their plan that they needed to reduce by 70%, which was at that time extremely ambitious. And my prime minister at that time called it a moonshot, and they had no idea how to get there at that time. So what they did was that they invited the Danish private sector to participate in this endeavor and come up with the solutions, because it was very clear that the government alone could never reach 70%. I mean, it was completely impossible, because most of the emissions were controlled one way or the other by what the private sector did and the actions that the private sector had. So the government formed 14 kind of sector working groups, climate partnerships it was called, and they gave the chairman's role to all of these, mainly to private sector CEOs. So they were responsible for writing a report, one on transport, one on energy, one on finance, etc., one on water, to tell the government, if we as private sector has to deliver these 70%, we have to do this, and this. And that all came together, and with that effort, actually it showed that it was possible to reach the 70% within the time horizon foreseen, but only because we had that very, very special commitment by the private sector. And since private sector, they are smart people, they also saw this as a huge opportunity for them, because of course they saw business in this, but they also knew if we were to deliver this and at the same time make some business out of it, there are these regulations that we need the government to change. So they said, yes, we can deliver this if you as government or municipality or whoever did the regulation, if you change this, and this, which were oftentimes for them a challenge to get through that regulation barrier as such. But then the government, of course, they had a huge incentive to say to private sector, okay, yes, we agree, and we will actually change this or that. because we know that if you are to deliver on your promises, then we have to open this gate or do away with this regulation or change this set of rules. So that was what happened. And what we've seen ever since is that this has really been moving forward. And recently, the government kind of copied this to the agricultural sector, where everybody knows that nowadays, because what happened was that we've been driving our emissions down in almost all sectors. The problem sector now is the agricultural sector in Denmark, and at the same time we had a lot of pollution from the agricultural sector. So there were so many challenges. So they copied the same model, invited the agricultural sector, the environmental NGOs of Denmark, and the government to sit in the same room and negotiate how do we go about this challenge. And they actually agreed on a carbon tax for the agricultural sector, but at the same time also regulations to change to how can the agricultural sector still produce within this challenge. And that was recently approved. The government is right now doing the final touches on the plan, and we expect that to be released within this year. Again, this is a good example of how to invite the private sector into the room and find the solutions that you as a society as whole needs. And that, I believe can be an inspiration in other countries. It was really great to listen to our Rwandan colleague, because you are doing a bit of the same actually in Rwanda and seeing some of the same challenges. And I know there are different cultures in different countries on how much can and should you involve private sector into government business. But again, our experience is that it actually pays off. It's actually a good idea, and as long as government keeps the stick in the hand, there's not too much to be afraid of. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ole. And this is exactly the conversation that we're having today, how to bring together private, public sectors to have a productive conversation on how to drive strong climate action. So I would like now to introduce our last keynote speaker, or our keynote speaker. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Álvaro Lario, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, to give us, to share the great experiences that IFAD has on effectively mobilizing finance for very difficult things sometimes. So please.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to have a lot of partners in the room, and it's great to have the NDC Partnership inviting us today to share some of our experiences. There's a clear crisis, that it has been mentioned, in terms of climate, biodiversity, and land degradation. And for us, that means that the NDCs need to also come together with the NAPs, with the MBSAPs, with the food systems pathways, and we need to make sure that we talk to each other in all of these elements. Teddy mentioned that the most important thing is actually how these investment plans translate into action, and I think that's the most important part of all of this. It's good to have it on paper, but the most important part is how we translate it, and multilaterals like ourselves and other MDBs are ready with the right incentives, the right structures, the right first law structures, using the grant money to really mobilize capital, and that's part of the key. As well as coordinating. It's clear that we are also very fragmented. We come all with our own projects, and they need to respond to the priorities of the government. So this is also very well taken. In the case of IFAD, as most of you know, we focus on small-scale farmers, and for us, they're the closest to the land, and they're the ones that are stewards in many cases of nature and of biodiversity, fragile landscapes, and ecosystems. So it's clear that we need to invest in them, we need to support them, but in the way that they also reap the benefits. They cannot only be bearing the costs, and I think this is very important when we are announcing sizes, figures, gaps. It's important how it trickles down to the people. Otherwise, all of the transition, the energy transition, the food system transition will not be successful. We need to make sure that people are reaping the benefits. And currently, in terms of the overall sizes, as you know, on the total of climate finance, small-scale farmers only receive 0.8%, which is 5-6 billion, which is very, very small. The reality is that global crop yields can really fall a lot by 2050. We're seeing already many countries, like in Ghana, cocoa production getting cut by half because of rains. We're seeing also in countries such as Brazil, coffee production also this year coming massively down. And this has an impact on commodities. It has an impact on food inflation. It has an impact throughout the world. That's why it's very important, this discussion on the NDC partnership between public and private. And as I said, that all of these plans, all of these goals speak to each other. For us, you were talking also all about methane, actually, about climate and agriculture. For us, that means also how we can support on rice cultivation, how we can support on livestock management to do it in a sustainable way, whereby even small-scale farmers are not the biggest contributors. It's mostly industrial farms. We also support them in adapting and also in tackling climate change. Let me just share to finalize one example of how we work with partners with the Green Climate Fund, with other MDBs, the private sector, and a Green Wall initiative in the Sahel. We are currently de-risking investments that are boosting the climate resilience of 2.5 million people, 250,000 hectares of land. That means more or less like Luxembourg. And this incorporates 10 commercial banks, 1,500 small enterprises, and 2,500 farmers organizations. And it's important, this last partner, because they are the ones who are translating the action into the ground and who put the small-scale farmers at the center of these plans. For us, NDCs means also adaptation and climate adaptation. At this COP, we would like to see really a size that is meaningful in terms of adaptation and also that focuses also on small-scale farmers and on how we can support them on improving soil health, productivity, and also profitability, which is also very much key. At IFAD, we have raised our climate finance target. Now it's 45% according to the MDB methodology. So that means for every dollar of investment, 45 cents goes into climate adaptation. We are mobilizing money from pension funds through our credit ratings so that we can also support small-scale farmers. And we will continue doing so with many of the partners of the room. So there's clearly alternatives to the current economic system or extractive economic system, whereby we put also nature into many of these discussions, and that we can make sure that the people, planet, and nature can really thrive together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate very much your intervention and bringing in climate mitigation and adaptation and very important elements like agriculture. So let's move now to our panel discussion. Let me invite our panelists. I'm very honored to have you all here, and I'll invite you to come and sit at the front. Let me start with Ralien Bekkers, who's the co-chair Sherpa of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action from the Netherlands and special representative of the Finance Minister for Climate Action. Ralien, welcome back to your home, the NDC Partnership. Second, Ms. Kate Hughes, Principal Climate Change Specialist at ADB and the Steering Committee representative for the Regional Development Banks of the NDC Partnership. Mr. Arturo Cardoso de la Cerda is the Director of Governance Affairs and Secretary to the Board of the Green Climate Fund. Please, thank you. Mr. Simon Thompson, Managing Director of the Global Capacity Building Coalition, an alliance of UN agencies, multilateral development banks, private finance, and others, including the NDC Partnership. We're very honored to be part of this coalition. And finally, Mr. Andrew Johnson, Director and CEO, and one of the co-founders of Climate Fund Managers. Great. Thank you very much, and let's get into it. Let me start by talking about the role of finance ministers. Finance ministers play a key role in coordination across governments and designing economic and fiscal policies with the potential to mobilize private finance and deliver the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Teddy was very clear in raising the importance of the role of finance ministers in driving climate action. So Raline, could you tell us, please, how the role of finance ministers is driving coordinated climate action, mobilizing private finance, and supporting the development and financing of ambitious NDCs?
Yes, thank you, Pablo. Great to be back here. I'm Raline Bekkers. I'm from the Coalition of Finance Ministers, co-chair from the Netherlands. I thought the presentations were great, specifically indeed the example from Rwanda, who's a very active coalition member, where the Ministry of Finance is really leading the work on climate, on nature, but also really the Ministry of Finance in the lead, and also for your NDC. And I think that sets a great example. And for Denmark, I thought it was particularly interesting also to hear the process of engaging the private sector, because there the Ministry of Finance also plays an important role. Because if we need to agree on what is the role of the private sector, who manages these regulations, who addresses like sustainable finance regulations, management of the financial sector, setting certain requirements, it's also the Ministry of Finance who has a coordinated role in that. So I thought that was very illustrative of like how the role we can play in NDCs, but also in bringing the private sector and then in coordinating. And we've been having quite some discussions also in the context of the G20 this year on how to bring the different stakeholders together and how to effectively mobilize finance. And one example there is country platforms, which I think is a concept that can build very much on what the NDC Partnership is doing in countries, and a way for us to scale this up even more, because I think the facts are that we are not mobilizing sufficient finance, both public and private. So how can we, in a way, work together more effectively to bring both public and private stakeholders to the table to mobilize the necessary financing for NDCs? And then in that, what is the role of the finance ministry again? Not just the sectoral ministries that need to take the specific actions, but also the finance ministry as a coordinating actor. So these are all of the things that we're currently also very closely involved in. Maybe two or three very brief points to make. One is the critical role of the third round of NDCs. We've actually said at the beginning of this year, as a coalition of finance ministers, that we need to involve the finance ministries from an early stage on more effectively. In the first or the previous round of NDCs, only a quarter of our finance ministries were involved. That needs to change. We initiated together with the NDC Partnership co-chairs, Rwanda and Denmark, but also with the UN system, a joint call to action, as well as a support initiative to really increase support to finance ministries to be involved in these NDCs 3.0, so that they can become effective investment and financing vehicles as well for climate action. But the reality, sadly, is that we still need to really step up that work. So this is another call to action a year later at this next COP, to really focus our attention on this in the coming time and work more closely on this and make sure that the finance ministries are getting involved and are getting the support that they will need to have some more capacity on climate as well, which is the main issue we're facing in our 95 member countries in all regions. Then briefly, the second point, this year, or actually a few weeks ago, we launched the coalition's second climate action statement. And here we have provided an overview of a very much bottom-up process, the specific actions on the ground that our finance ministries are taking on climate. Last year in the first statement, we had about 180 actions from 40 countries. And this year it had increased to nearly 500 actions from 60 member countries, really showing an increase in activities for finance ministers on climate. And here specifically, we saw two trends that are relevant to this discussion. One is a doubling of the actions relating to coordination and strategy. So finance ministries getting more involved in climate policy and economic strategy alignment with climate. So that's a very important trend. And the second one, more than a twofold increase in actions related to sustainable finance. So really looking at our role in mobilizing private sector into this effort, because we need to scale up that private finance. My last point is it's Finance Day. And we will be bringing together finance ministers this afternoon. We will actually include also some private sector stakeholders into this discussion. And the 3 points that we will be discussing among them is one, on effective mobilization of public and private finance and how the finance ministry can do that for the NDC, specifically for mitigation, but also for adaptation. Secondly, this coordination question, or how to translate NDCs into specific investments and so on, including through country platforms. And then thirdly, how can partners really support us, and how can private sector really come in, and we'll bring also these stakeholders into the conversation more and more. And we also hope to do that next year more at the regional level to make everything a bit more concrete in collaboration with the NDC Partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raline. A lot of work, a lot of collaboration, a lot long way to go, but the initiative is fundamental in bringing the coalition, the ministers of finance together. So thank you for that. And one of the critical roles of ministers of finance also is to engage with the multilateral development banks and to collaborate closely with them in terms of driving climate action. So let me now move to Kate. Last year at COP28, the MDBs issued a joint statement to deepen collaboration to deliver as a system and fast-track the mobilization of private finance and deployment of climate finance across the world. This year, multiple efforts are underway to increase the efficiency and climate impact of the MDBs. So could you please elaborate on the progress that has been made since last year and the role that MDBs can play in driving public and private investment towards NDCs?
Sure, thank you very much. So yeah, I think there's been an ongoing and increasing dialogue on the issue of MDB reform, right? And the role that MDBs play in terms of how critical they are to the entire climate finance system. It may not always appear from the outside, but the actual evolution in thinking among MDBs has been really phenomenal in the last 4 or 5 years. I think for ADB, there's now a recognition that it's not just about deploying climate finance, but how we reorient the entire institution to be to support climate, right? And so the delivery of climate finance is one critical part of that, but how do we orient all of our operations, all of our support to developing member countries along that pathway? So ADB announced, started a new operating model from the 1st of July last year, and the two big, yes, that's really critical, but it's an input indicator, right? And so collectively, the MDBs have been doing a lot of work on looking at issues around access, looking at issues around quality. And you would have seen earlier this week in the joint MDB statement that we announced, there's a significant increase in the climate finance numbers, but there's also a whole body of work that's been done on outcome indicators and how we start to look at the impact and the quality of our finance. There's also a paper that we put out on country platforms. So obviously this is a big topic, it's a big issue, and the MDBs play a key role in that. So we've come together collectively to, I think, articulate and make it clearer to stakeholders, clearer to the market what our views are on country platforms. And maybe lastly to add, I think, again, that moving away from that narrow focus on climate finance, that the role of MDBs is to create systems and markets for finance to flow, right? Not just to deploy the finance. And so there's been such a significant step up in the sort of upstream policy and technical assistance work ongoing to really create those enabling environments for finance to flow. So one example, ADB actually today is launching its fiscal resilience initiative that it worked very closely with the Coalition of Finance Ministers. So that's a platform for countries in Asia Pacific to ministries of finance to work on integrating both climate risk and transition risk into policy making. So that critical upstream policy support that will eventually lead to increasing climate finance flow. I might leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And it's very, very good to hear the broad set of plans that the MDBs are taking forward to be more effective in helping countries mobilize the necessary finance for the implementation of their NDCs. And one of the critical tools for countries to effectively mobilize finance, both to finance their own projects, but ideally to mobilize private finance also effectively, is the GCF. So let me move on to Alisher. The GCF has launched its strategy for 2024 to 2027 and a new organizational structure to increase its impact, and is working closely with other multilateral climate funds to increase collective impact and accelerate the mobilization of climate finance to developing countries. Could you please elaborate on the key developments in the GCF and how multilateral climate funds are and will strengthen coherence and complementarity to catalyze private investments and support countries in delivering their ambitious NDCs. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. And first of all, I'd like to convey apologies on behalf of my director, Artur, who unfortunately couldn't make it to this meeting. And I would like to thank NDCP for inviting me. This is indeed a privilege to address on this Finance Day, in this Finance COP, the audience on this crucial topic. I would like to share indeed a few, we have quite some updates and developments from GCF from past 1-2 years. We really initiated major changes to make access more streamlined and simplify access. So I would like to share some points from that, but also, of course, on that point of complementarity and coherence that again, is developing quite fast. And today, I would like also invite everyone. We have an event by 4 funds joint event on this topic on improving complementarity and coherence. First of all, just for all colleagues, the GCF is the largest multilateral climate fund, and we are an operating entity of the financial mechanism. So we have a very strong mandate under the Convention and Paris Agreement to deliver finance to developing countries. And of course, in that regard, we are following very closely what's going on NCQG. So NCQG negotiations to see how parties would see our role in that space going forward for the coming years. And we serve all, so it's about 150 developing countries, so all non-Annex 1 countries can get support from GCF, both through what we call a readiness program, which is the largest capacity building program in the climate space in the world, and also through our mitigation and adaptation windows. We also have been supporting especially LDC seeds and African states, especially in the adaptation space. We have a 50% floor, minimum floor that half of our adaptation finance needs to go to that category. But of course, we also support a lot of the mitigation actions. If you go, so for example, to give just some numbers, for LDCs, we have provided so far in total 4.2 billion in climate finance, and to seeds 1.6 billion. In total, with the last board meeting we just concluded a few weeks ago, and at which actually $1 billion was programmed at this meeting, we have now reached 16 billion in our finance that was committed, and together with co-finances we have surpassed 60 billion now in total portfolio. Also, what is important, the GCF is very universal in terms of financial instruments that we can use. So we have the whole suite of instruments is available to us. Right now, if you look at the composition, it's around 40% for grants. That's the biggest one, 42%. 40% loans, but also we have equity guarantees, results-based payments instruments. So and we use them in design and implementation of projects where they're mostly needed. And also, of course, private sector. We have a dedicated facility, which was actually mandated in our governing instrument, project sector facility, which private sector facility, which is working exclusively with private sector. So this is also a very unique feature of GCF. And just to give some examples of that, we also providing a lot of funding in terms of equity. And we also are a big risk taker, so we take a risk, a high risk, in return for a high climate impact in mitigation and adaptation impact. And recently, actually, the board has renewed also its risk appetite statement, which actually reflects that position of our board. So just to say that in terms of equity financing, we have already provided 1.8 billion in that, and it has also very high catalytic potential. This is leveraged in total about 10 billion, so it's about ratio 1 to 5.5, and also about 28% of that goes to least developed countries, which is also quite interesting. Now I would like to say a few words about the recent developments in terms of improving our internal efficiencies, because you know, it's not secret that sometimes players in that field and climate funds are criticized for long processing times. So what we have done so far, we have considerably reduced the period between the approval from the board and the first disbursement. So now it's down to 4.5 months. But we have actually examples when this is done in 1 day. So the board approves the project, we sign financing agreement on the same day, and we make disbursement on the same day. So this is something new. We just started basically from this year. And we would like to see more, of course, of this going forward. Also, recently, our Executive Director, Mafalda Duarte, announced that from next year, we'll strive to reduce the time from the concept review to the final approval by the board to 9 months on average. So we will work towards that. This also will be a huge improvement. We also switch now to regional model of delivering in programming. So we have established our regional departments. So also this is a big development to be closer, to working closer. I mean, they're all still based in Songdo, in our headquarters, but also the board is discussing potential decentralization of the fund, but the discussions are still ongoing. So all this is, of course, will help us to deliver better and to serve developing countries more efficiently. Now coming to what we do in the space of 4 funds collaboration, so Adaptation Fund, GEF, GCF, and Climate Investment Funds. So last year in Dubai, our heads have committed, they issued a joint statement to enhance complementarity and coherence. And during this year, we've been working on several streams of work to make this happen. So discussions are ongoing, and we have also established a good governance structure of how we are working together. The heads have their heads committee, and also we have several working groups. So we also will be launching soon our Climate Projects Explorer AI tool, which will help to scan all our projects and see synergies, but also identify gaps. And again, we will be providing more details. The heads will during that meeting at 12, which I already mentioned. We're also working very closely on results management and indicators to see if we can also move towards harmonized indicators. And of course, in our procedures, we are checking and how we can streamline them more and harmonize to, again, streamline access. Yeah, so those are the news from us. And again, just to say on GCF side, with our readiness program and projects, we'll continue to support, especially NDC, of course, implementation. So in the new strategy that we have, 24-27 strategy, both for programming and readiness, NDC takes central stage. We will continue to support countries, but we will also realize that the needs are in trillions, and it will only work if we work together in this. And in that regard, also would like to mention that we have GCF a strong enabler role in the architecture. We work very closely with our MDB colleagues, with bilaterals, with domestic players, and in trying to, of course, enable also larger amounts and catalyze more. And finally, would like also to mention that we are working very closely with NDC Partnership, especially on the framework we collaborate, but also I think going forward, we look forward how we can work together in supporting NDC implementations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alisher, and thank you for the collaboration, and congratulations on the optimization processes. I think that's going to be very welcomed by all countries. Now let's shift a little bit and hear from 2 speakers that bring the voices of the private sector. Let me start with you, Simon. The Global Capacity Building Coalition was launched at COP29 to enhance climate finance capacity and technical assistance for financial institutions in emerging markets and developing countries. What is needed to mobilize private finance to support the successful delivery of NDCs, and how will the work of the GCBC and its members help to enable this process?
Thanks, Pablo. Good morning, everybody. Clarity, certainty. You'd expect me to say this, capacity building. Those 3 C's can unlock that 4th, the word that's been used by yourself, Pablo, by lots of the speakers earlier, collaboration. Collaboration for climate action and to unlock climate finance. But on the first 2 C's there, clarity and certainty, my colleagues at GFANZ, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, so I work with them closely. GFANZ is one of the founding members of the Global Capacity Building Coalition. So I can't formally speak on their behalf, but at least I can informally speak on behalf. They've been gathering feedback from the private sector, from financial institutions, as to what they believe will enhance the financeability of the more ambitious round of NDCs, due just a few months' time, hopefully. And the headline message that comes from private finance is that the sector is ready to act, the capital is there and can be mobilized. But in order for that mobilization to happen, they would like countries to set out in national transition, or to develop national transition plans that have much more detail than is typically found in an NDC, the specific steps that countries will take to deliver on their climate commitments. To give the market the clarity, that's the first C, to clarity it needs on each country's unique transition pathway, including sectoral pathways, intended policies, the public financing commitments, sectoral decarbonisation priorities, national investment priorities, national project pipelines, and so on. But we had some good examples of that earlier from our colleague in Denmark who talked about the work they've been doing with the agricultural sector. Ralin, you mentioned country platforms earlier, which are a great example of that too. And that can help really unlock that. I think, Pablo, you talked about that risk-return ratio and how sometimes the private sector sort of struggles with the risk appetites of financial institutions to get that to work. Well, actually, clarity can really help with that. The second C, certainty, and I think we've heard this for many years. The private sector needs policy certainty at all levels. That's at national level, local government level. Because if we're going to deploy capital at scale over long time horizons, then that certainty, whether it's in the national climate plans, whether it's in sectoral decarbonisation pathways and so on, down to the really detailed, granular stuff, even at the retail level. And I can give a very personal example. Somebody who's been trying to put solar panels on my house at home in Scotland. Well, in the 12 months I've been trying to do that, there have been 3 different sort of local devolved government in Scotland and UK subsidy schemes. It's just too complicated. So we need policy certainty at all levels. So clarity and certainty. We need capacity building. We've talked about that for the public sector. We need capacity building for the private sector too. That's primarily the role of the Global Capacity Building Coalition. And our aim is to get to the point where every professional financial decision takes account of climate change. That was Mark Carney's words at COP26. And if you follow that through, logically that means that every finance professional in every financial institution in the world needs not to be a climate expert, but to have the basics of climate and sustainability knowledge and be able to apply that in their everyday work as a banker, as an investor, as an accountant, as an insurer, as a lawyer, as whatever they do. That's where we're trying to get to. But we shouldn't be doing that in isolation. We seem to be doing capacity building for central banks and regulators in one place, for the private sector in another place. There's the real economy part of upskilling, reskilling, all the green jobs we need and so on. Let's remember, this is a transition, if it's been a successful transition, of almost every economic entity, every economic activity everywhere in the world. So capacity building is a huge challenge for everybody. We need to bring that together in a genuine spirit of collaboration. We need bigger rooms with more people in, where we're learning together, building sort of programs of action learning together, and then perhaps the world can move forward together a little more effectively.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And can I just say on the final point, though, in terms of collaboration, though, then, and you mentioned this briefly, I'm delighted that the NDC Partnership is the very newest member, really over the past 24 hours of the Global Capacity Building Coalition. Thanks for helping us get that over the line. And that's a perfect example of this collaboration, because we will be working with yourselves, with the UNFCCC, who have the capacity building mandate. We're doing work with them this afternoon, the Capacity Building Hub, to try and at a very practical level, bring together capacity building for public sector, for private sector, to unlock and support the financing of the next NDCs.
Thank you very much. And in our engagement with almost 100 countries, capacity building keeps on coming repeatedly as a critical element. Institutional capacity, personal capacity, private, public. So that's very important, the points that you made. Let's close today's conversation with Andrew Johnston, Climate fund managers have comprehensive experience in using blended finance to attract public and private capital to invest in high impact sectors in emerging economies. You have been leading on innovative approaches to mobilize climate finance to different sectors and geographies. So we have a lot to learn from you, and you've been very brave and innovative. Could you please elaborate on the main challenges in scaling up blended finance, and what have been some effective strategies to overcome these challenges in emerging markets?
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So I'll answer that question, but I actually want to put in the context of the NDCs, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell the story in three parts. The first is that mobilization of capital all starts with an investment decision. An investment decision occurs within an investment committee. Climate fund managers manages $2 billion. We have within our house 8 investment committees to manage those $8 billion. I mean, those $2 billion. In addition to that, in our ecosystem, we have another 2 investment committees. So we alone, and we're only one small drop in the ocean, have 10 investment committees that sit at least once a week. Now, in each of those investment committees, they need to make a go. And the decision they're going to make is it the right project? And the right project is whether the numbers work, whether the asset itself works, whether it does the job, and whether it delivers the impact. And at the moment, our impact measurements are actually quite simplistic. It's things like job creation, gender equivalency, SDGs at a macro level, and then you drop down to another level and say, how do you interpret SDG outputs, greenhouse gas avoidance, we get into granularity of carbon footprints, scope 1 to 2 and 3, but there's a big gap in between. Nowhere in this conversation is NDCs. And so what we are trying to do is actually now use NDCs as the rationale for making an investment. And if we can use NDCs as a nexus for rationality, then we can use that to communicate with the host government, who's hosting it, and use an incentive as to why this project contributes to their NDC aggregate contribution on the one hand. We can put the investment within a rationale for commercial investors as to why it's the right project, because it's an aggregate. And importantly, we are talking to developers every single day, and to direct them in their thinking of what is the right project towards a orientation of NDCs, as opposed to does it comply with IFC performance standards, which it must, by the way. It's a very powerful positioning for a project. And that you then have governments, implementers, you have project proponents, developers, you have financiers, and you have investment committees, all using the same unit of measure, which is the NDC. And the NDC is powerful because it's not a macro measure, it's actually a targeted parochial measure that makes that project relevant to the jurisdiction in which you're doing it. So we're trying to use this. So we're probably the only investment house at the moment that actually has a part in our investment paper that talks about the alignment of that particular investment to the NDCs and the NDCs of the jurisdiction. And we only started doing that 6 months ago. Now we're halfway through the SDG plan, and we're only now getting to the NDCs, and we're the only guys doing it. So the advocacy, the capacity building that you speak about, Simon, the type of stuff that we're doing both within the house and within our industry associations and dealing with our developers, are making them aware of NDCs. And then the final point is that to the extent that NDCs, which they do very powerfully create a narrative, a global narrative, they should equally be applied to the other planetary boundaries. I just came back from the biodiversity COP, and they've got another term, you know, these MB SAPs, completely different thing. And I think, well, what are these things? You know, but they're the same things. So we really need so I'm a big fan of NDCs. I love it. I love the NDC partnership, and the closer we can get to the work that you're doing and the decisions we're making every week, then we'll start getting alignment and scale.
Well, I think that's a great way to close this conversation, using NDCs as a common unit of measure to determine viability, to determine impact, that as a common language across all the stakeholders that are sitting here, that need to deliver on finance, that need to drive the development of the countries, that need to bring together the resources of the different sources through strong collaboration. So we're very, very happy to have you all here. I thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. one of many that we've been having and that we will have in the future. Please join me in thanking them again. And we're running a little late, so I won't do any long closing, but just to reiterate the importance of continuing this conversation. Finance is the biggest challenge that countries face in implementing their NDCs. We can work very hard on raising ambition, but if we don't implement that ambition, then we won't do much. So let's continue working together, bringing the critical stakeholders together, collaborate, build the capacities across the board so that we can deliver on countries' promises in terms of climate commitment. Thank you very much.